Good evening. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California, and this is tape number 488, broadcast number 488, April the 12th, 1981. I have a guest with me this evening, Ray Fabrizio, professor for Monterey Peninsula College, an accomplished musician here on the Monterey Peninsula, who has time to teach and to do his music and also to study current events constantly and turn the students on to what's happening. I've been very lucky on this peninsula. I've been able to express my opinions and research for 9 years at KLRB, and I've been lucky also 2 semesters. Ray and I taught a class at Monterey Peninsula College on the American assassinations, and thanks to Ray and his constant working with young people, we've been able to reach people in this community who've gone over other places elsewhere, and a lot that he's done has reached many, many people. Before I introduce you to Ray, I just want to say I have a book that I really like very much, and it has a list of ways to make life rich and full of meaning. And I was looking at it this week, and I was thinking it describes Ray Fabrizio and the relationship that he has with his research, or that I've known him. It was a book on creative thinking, and the first item was a desire to make things better, alertness to be open to everything, an interest in digging below the surface, curiosity, a constant spirit of inquiry, thoughtfulness leading to thorough understanding, concentration to penetrate matters in depth, the application of your energy and effort, patience to solve problems in detail, optimism, combining enthusiasm and self-confidence, and cooperation, working productively with others. I think those 10 things are very important for the people that I like and respect, and Ray is one of those people. It's really been wonderful knowing you and working with you on this peninsula and sharing information constantly.
Well, thanks, Mia. Gosh, I hope that I have just a few of those qualities that you mentioned, and I think I have also I don't know about the depth. I spread myself so thin. I do have the interest and the awareness, but unfortunately, I don't have the time to devote to these things that I would like to have.
I think you have the depth. I think throwing out new ideas every time there is a holiday, a remembrance of John Kennedy's assassination, or the shooting of John Lennon, or this evening we're going to talk about the near murder or the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan and the comparisons to the John Kennedy assassination, just alerting people to the possibility that there are similarities and sharing them with your students. They always come back, and I hear from them that you're opening up new doors and areas that other people are afraid to do. They're afraid to go into it, and you bring out the possibility, is there more than we're seeing? And that is important. You don't have to tell them what they'll find at the end of the tunnel, but at least tell them to explore it.
Exactly, and I do try to give them hints on how to detect propaganda and how to know when they're being lied to, and then they can be on their own. This is very important, and they need the encouragement to know that someone older with more experience has the same kinds of doubts and questions, and they shouldn't be afraid to doubt and question themselves. This is my job as a teacher, I think.
Well, last week when the shooting took place of Ronald Reagan, I got a phone call from a gentleman on the peninsula who is retired now. He's in the highest levels of military intelligence and in the Army. He was the interpreter at the Gary Powers trial. Peter Thomas, do you know him? He lives on the peninsula.
I know of him.
Yeah, and he's a close friend of mine, and he interpreted for Khrushchev and for Gary Powers, speaks Russian, German, and English. And he was talking about the Reagan shooting, and he believes in the research that we're doing. He said the truth will set you free. He's not afraid of truth coming out. And I said, well, what will we do when another layer of cover-up comes? And he said, do what you're doing, reach the young people, and keep telling them the truth, and eventually forget about the older ones and get to the young people so they can see it. And that's what you do at the college. I hear all the time from the different classes.
Well, I hope I hope I reach a few. I know you do. A lot of my students listen to your show regularly.
Well, I have one apology now, and then we're going to go on to this evening. It's going to be the comparisons of patterns between the murder of John Kennedy, specifically, and the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. I have to apologize to my listeners. Last week, a play of words and kind of a little joke, I kept talking about John Warlock Hinkle.
Warlock, right.
Warlock Hinkle. Yeah. Well, there was one article in the paper that he got a job as a disc jockey at a station using the name Warlock. And I did it half as a joke, knowing that the Warlock would link eventually to the Manson family and the whole cast of lies. And the Hinckley reminded me of Warren Hinkle, a double agent in San Francisco who I detest. So it was kind of an ninja of Warlock Hinkle. And then this week, this clone, this Edward Richardson, appeared in New Haven, Connecticut, and New York, who was in the nearby area of Colorado, whose paths crossed with Hinckley, John Hinckley. And he said his hero was the Manson family and Squeaky Fromm and the SLA. So, and that we have a whole team of assassins, and his mentor is Carl McIntyre and the Deep Christian Church. So I knew within a week the Warlock would tie in. The whole mystical thing would go in. Too long to cover now, and I won't do any more in-jokes. We'll call him John Hinckley Jr., right. But I still want to call him Warlock. Okay? Now, on to the gross similarities. What are the ones, some of those that you notice, that people, young people or older people, should be noticing in this case? Well,
I noticed right from the beginning, from the earliest videotapes, that there was a lot of contradiction between what I saw and what the press was explaining that I saw. For example, the shots. The three men who were hit react violently to shots, and yet we see the president being pushed into the car. And I've studied the videotapes quite closely, and I'm going to get 5 more hours of them by next week, which I'll study even more closely. But I'm convinced that Reagan was not hit. If he was hit, it was by a very different kind of bullet, or if he was hit after he got into the car. The reason why I say that is that we can see McCarthy, the Secret Service man, being literally lifted off his feet by one of the shots. We can see, of course, that the police officer and Brady are felled immediately, and to lift a 179-pound man, McCarthy, off the ground requires a high-powered rifle, and also he was thrown, I would say 5 to 6 feet to our right. That is, from the view of the camera, he's thrown right. I would say 5 or 6 feet. That would be consistent with a shot from our left, from somewhere else, where everybody, by the way, was looking as soon as the shots rang out.
From somewhere else.
All the eyes are in that direction, and then Hinckley is back here where the camera is. Now that's an indication of more than the possibility of shots from more than one direction.
Different. Also, and for those of the listeners who are too young or don't remember the Dallas comparison, when John Kennedy was shot through the throat or through the back, or John Connally, they were fairly clean bullets. And then his head exploded and the brain crashed, and that was messy. In this case, 3 men were messy, and Reagan was clean. The response was totally different.
That's right.
Coming from one gun.
And we have shots coming from the rear. The shot that went through Connally is definitely from the rear.
It was a clean bullet, though.
That was a clean bullet.
Came out pristine. It was so clean.
That's right.
Yeah, but the response of Reagan, the first story was that he walks into the hospital on his own feet, or was just thrown to the car for protection. And the reaction of Ronald Reagan was entirely different than the other 3 men.
That's true. Exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing too, the photos are so important. I think in both in both assassinations, JFK and the assassination attempt on President Reagan. I'm interested in the photos that must exist, that were taken by newsmen standing next to the car and behind the car, photographing from the, in other words, photographing the whole action from the opposite point of view. In other words, Hinckley would be in these photographs.
They said they would show us those, but they never did.
They haven't yet.
They said they would.
And that should solve any doubts about Hinckley and his friend there. I'm sure you'll mention it.
Yeah, well, we'll get it. Well, that is consistent with the Warren Commission using and confiscating immediately the film of Abraham Zapruder standing on the side of the car where John Kennedy was hit from the one side, and then individual researchers, such as Richard Sprague, collecting 25,000 different photos or feet of pictures across the street where there is possibly a gunman or a man standing at the Daltex window on the stepway, and a Mr. Hicks of the security department picking up shells. And the view was entirely different from the other side. You might have gotten in researchers through the years, including the tramps being taken away and so forth. The Zapruder film only caught the fact that the president was killed.
That's right. And if these, of course, this kind of withholding of vital evidence, if these films were, if people were interested, if the FBI were really interested in solving these crimes, all they need to do is collect these photographs, and by triangulating them, we would know exactly which shots were fired, and as we can reconstruct now in Dealey Plaza.
Of course, that's another comparison. You have that quotation I gave you of the FBI. You say, if they were interested, and yet, for all purposes, the case was solved, within
That's
3
right.
days.
They said that we've got, there he is.
Yeah, we've got the case for all, we have no evidence of a conspiracy, the FBI said. We have some sheets here, you'll hear papers rattling with a description of the FBI. We'll come across them saying, for all purposes, nobody else was involved.
Right.
The men investigating the case and the Justice Department.
Another important parallel that I see is another parallel is the importance of eyewitnesses interviewed on the scene right after the events. You'll recall the eyewitnesses at Dealey Plaza in Dallas spoke of shots coming from the grassy knoll. I mean, an overwhelming majority of them. Other eyewitnesses heard shots from other directions too. And yet the Warren Commission chose to believe that all the shots came from the one
man.
From the one man again. Now, eyewitnesses, when the shots were fired at Reagan, first said that they did not see Reagan hit. They also the reports for an hour, I believe, where the president had not been hit. Now, I think these eyewitness accounts are very interesting. Later on in the day, when these same videotapes were being replayed, the eyewitness remarks were cut out of the tapes.
Well, the original tapes, though, whoever videotaped it right away got those. Even got a reference to the grassy knoll.
That's right.
They pointed to the wall and said they came from the grassy knoll.
I think somebody was trying to be funny, but it had real relevance.
Yeah.
Because one of the eyewitnesses spoke of seeing someone shooting from up there. There was some reference to a higher shot.
Yeah.
And also...
Sherman Skolnick said that I talked to him today. He's a well-known researcher in Chicago, and he said that one of the witnesses who hasn't been interviewed since then, a woman, and it wasn't Judy Woodruff, who was staying near the NBC camera. It was somebody that said they heard a crackling fire and suggested even the roof, the trajectory of higher up at the Hilton Hotel, that there was this sound coming from a crackling noise that they picked up, and this person has never been located. And also...
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly in one of the early videotapings, there was a young eyewitness, a young man, who was asked by one of the reporters, did you see the president hit? And he said, no, I didn't see him hit. When the shots rang out and when he was being pushed in the car, I could see that his face showed concern and that he was startled. And then he started to say more, but there was a fellow, a very imposing, tall and strong fellow behind him, happened to be a black man, who looked sort of hippie-ish, but you knew he wasn't. He was, and in a voice of quiet authority, said, "Hold up, man. Now hold up there."
Didn't want to talk?
Didn't want him to talk. And the young man turned around quite
Did you get on the tape?
This is on the tape.
On the videotape.
This will undoubtedly be on the 5 hours of tape that I'm going to get from a friend next time, but I distinctly remember that.
Now, the changing of the trajectory of the bullets, one gun expert told me that in order to try and kill somebody, you aim for the arm or armpit because it can go down to the heart if it's higher up, and if they wear a bulletproof vest, you're sure to get them. You go for the armpit and it goes down. Now, if there were somebody, again, on a roof, maybe with a silencer, with that crackling sound simultaneously, and his arm is raised, that would explain how it went 1 inch from the heart and went in the armpit.
That's right. That would explain. However, this would have had to happen pretty much as Reagan was pushed into the car, because as he is pushed into the car, he shows no sign of being hit by any high-powered rifle.
Until he gets in the car.
Well, we know that when he got in the car, he complained that the Secret Service agent Parr, is that his name?
This is something we were talking about that isn't a comparison to Kennedy, because he was good and dead.
That's right.
The interesting point is that, like you're saying, Ronald Reagan fell down and blamed the agent for breaking his rib, which would be similar to the Robert Kennedy assassination. Say if he had lived where Thane Caesar is behind him and shoots from behind, if he wasn't 1 inch from the back of the head, say the shoulder hit, where they later removed the ceiling from the ambassador and cut off the sleeve where the shots came from behind, was Ronald Reagan in the car. And that anguish on his face is that he got a bullet into the area and collapsed and blamed his fall on cracking a rib. Yeah.
In any case, Reagan's wound is not consistent with a shot fired from ground level. It's not consistent with a shot fired because he was pushed into the car, and as he's bending down, the shot would go up, right? All of the diagrams showing Reagan's wound show a very, very clean wound angling down from his armpit.
And then it changes course.
Off the rib, and then it lodges in the lung.
This is like the Dallas story again. These bullets do the zigzags. They don't just go down. They ricochet. They change course. They go back up, and then they go down again.
Here's another parallel. The changing of the evidence with regard to wounds. The nature of the wounds are very important in any murder case.
And the very first day, you get an exact diagram.
Yes.
Of the bullet and the wound.
Now, they say it's a ricochet. Of course, we'll talk about that, I guess, in a minute, why they had to have 6 shots. But a ricochet bullet becomes very deformed, and it doesn't follow a neat path in any body.
So for the time it hits, then it breaks, you mean?
That's right. In other words, it's very difficult for me to buy the story that Reagan was hit by a ricochet bullet. But the ricochet bullet story, to me, must be an attempt to restrict the bullets to 6, because if we got another bullet, we've got a conspiracy. Political conspiracies don't happen in this country, right? They only happen in the banana republics.
Well, of course, the photographing of this scene and the photographing of Dallas are the same, and then the one you had to fit the amount of bullets into the Mannlicher Carcano in the certain amount of seconds that the film was going. And in this case, you can't have more than 6, so if you have 7 bullets, one of them has to be not from where John Hinckley was standing, but from the car, which is a different direction, isn't it?
That's right, or from the front of the car. I counted the bullets. Now, at first they said that the police officer was hit by 2 bullets. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say he was hit by 1 bullet, which injured his shoulder and his neck. All right, we've got McCarthy, the Secret Service man, hit once. We've got the police officer, Delaney, I believe. He's hit once. We've got Brady hit once. We've got Reagan hit once. We've got the door hit once. We've got the window hit once. And we've got a hole in the building across the street, which I thought was a bank, but you said might
be it'd be an insurance company or a bank,
Now, that's 7. That's even granting them 1 shot to the police officer.
In 3 seconds.
In
less than 3 seconds, almost.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't
the timing was actually less than 3 seconds. And 3 were felled to the ground, and the other one is singing and dancing and wishing he was in Philadelphia, right? With blood coming out of his nose and mouth.
Yes. That's another parallel. The contradictory reports about the president's reactions to his wound.
Well, the very first confusion was so obvious when they said it was a .38 caliber. This is on the tapes.
Right.
And then it became a .22. Well, the minute John Kennedy was put into Parkland Hospital and Lee Harvey Oswald became the suspect, they were walking out of the building with the Mannlicher, with the German Mauser.
German Mauser.
And identified by the law enforcement. And that took them 24 hours to become a Mannlicher Carcano.
Right.
Now, this Hinckley, they jumped the gun on two things. Just like with Lee Harvey Oswald, they said it was the German Mauser. And there were Mausers in the building.
That's
then,
right.
Remember there were two Mausers in the building?
In a different spot, though.
Yeah. Oswald, when he was arrested, said, wait, there's Mausers in the building. Then it became a Carcano. Well, in this case, he had bought a .38, one in Dallas. It was confiscated in Nashville. And then he bought a .38 in Denver, Colorado on January 21st of this year. So right away they said it was a .38. And then all of a sudden they said, no, it's a .22 because he bought that from poor old Mr. Goldstein. We'll get into that. And it became a .22. But where did they get the confusion, again, about the nature of the bullets, or 3 days later saying that they're hollow bullets?
That they're hollow bullets or explosive. And that was another fuzzy thing, the difference between explosive bullets and hollow had poison-filled bullets with poison cartridges in. You know, going back to the Mauser and Carcano, maybe our listeners should maybe they don't understand that the German Mauser rifle is generally considered by experts in firearms to be one of the most deadly and deadly accurate weapons for any kind of killing. And the Italian Carcano is universally recognized as the worst. It's completely outdated. So we're not talking about just an unimportant point here. In other words, if a .38 was used, we might be able to explain the force of the missile that hit McCarthy.
Totally different.
Totally different.
The
from
three
a
of them, yes, and then the
Yes.
one little .22.
Right. This is a parallel which is very important because the hard evidence, the ballistics evidence, is so essential. And of course, the ballistics evidence was messed up and messed with very early on in the Kennedy assassination.
So what we get is a difference in what the weapon was, a difference in the direction, a discrepancy on how many could go out in a given time. The witnesses that had one version that are never called to present themselves. Mm-hmm. The one thing you're getting in this case is the silence of the surgeons you mentioned.
Yes, to this moment they've never been interviewed.
Never been seen. They're not going to go on a limb like Commander Hume and say it went this way or that way.
All of the doctors at Parkland Hospital, for example, for I think it was a day and a half, said that the first shot that hit Kennedy in the neck was an entrance shot. Well, after the FBI interviewed them, then it suddenly became an exit wound, you know, and then it makes these doctors look silly. So I can appreciate the fact that they might not want to go out on a limb describing the real operation that was performed on our president now.
One of the points of the comparisons that I made note is that at the time that John Kennedy was killed, the Secret Service and all the people made a run in a different direction than when Lee Harvey Oswald was. And in this case, everyone was looking in a different place than where John Hinckley.
They were looking straight ahead, and Hinckley was to their left.
Up to the left,
That's
yes.
Right. And also, well, yeah, finish.
No, go on.
I'm sorry,
that's okay.
there's so much to talk about.
We could do 3 hours.
But I find it very suspicious. There's another parallel here. I found it suspicious that the president had to walk so far to the limousine from this exit that the car was not parked directly in front of the exit, which seems to me to be the safest thing to do.
He had to make a slant.
He had to turn. Yes, he had to walk quite a ways, and the car was a weird slant right at the curve of that drive. Now, in the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination, we see very clearly that the presidential limousine slows down as they approach. It almost stops when it gets to the grassy knoll area. And these are very suspicious things.
They didn't escalate till after he was hit. And in this case, they had him walking farther at an angle, which would be really difficult. I also think if he was walking straight from the door to the car, probably through the arm or something, there'd be less chance of getting the heart. At the angle that he was at, he was more at an angle where it'd be easier to get him.
Well, I think the parallel in both cases, yeah, that's true. The parallel in both cases is that both moves put the president in greater danger, contrary to standard Secret Service procedure.
Yeah.
In other words, well, you get into the secret.
Well,
you've got a note there about the parallels about the protecting of the president.
Yeah.
All of these rules that are violated, standard practices violated by the Secret Service in both instances.
The favors of law enforcement. Well, one of the shocking articles was in the Washington Post this week, April 3rd, where Mr. Knight, Director Stuart Knight of the Secret Service, said that this potential assassin was in the audience right on the street, a known potential assassin, well known to the Secret Service as a possible threat, was in the crowd of onlookers. And the diversionary in all of this was John. He was acting up, even though he was a known threat, and people were watching him, when it was John Hinckley who really was just standing there. And they didn't apprehend him or take him off the street, and Mr. Knight said the person that people thought was Hinckley, acting like a herky-jerky manner he uses, I don't know where he gets that from, just before the shots rang out, was already a known person in the Secret Service, and they ascertained that he posed no threat. Well, was he ever frisked? If everybody is looking at the single hand going out, is that the only one that's shooting? Mm-hmm. It's such a posture to stick your hand straight out, of this motley group and just throw away those bullets.
There was no question in my mind, looking at the videotapes, that hand was firing shots. You can see the pistol recoil, but this business of he's the one, this propensity to think, to make us believe that when you find one man, you've solved the crime.
Well, that's like Sirhan's attorney saying when it came out that there was evidence of a second gun. He said, well, being as my client was there with the intent to shoot, he's guilty anyway. It doesn't matter, with the intent. Sirhan could be a diversionary shooting around the place where the fatal bullet comes from behind, from a security guard. So what you get here is a situation where the security guards are all looking at one man and jumping him. Mm-hmm. Where did the herky-jerky guy go that was the risk?
That's right. And
well, did they run and grab him, too? If they, a herky-jerky, I don't think Mr. Stuart Knight uses that often. He's making all the funny faces, and he's the diversionary. Did anyone run for him?
Obviously not.
Maybe he was holding the .38 that Hinckley got in. Who knows what the guys were hit from, and maybe Hinckley was working with somebody on the street. They all ran for the one person.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a real peril. It's got to be a lone assassin. They come on the air immediately after all political assassinations in this country. Some authority comes on the air immediately, even before the facts are in, even before all of the elementary facts are in, and they say no conspiracy.
Well, this is why I think Jack Ruby's murder of Lee Harvey Oswald was done on camera, because if you saw him shoot, somebody else wasn't holding his hand, and therefore there was no conspiracy. They don't go into the telephone call or really go to probe of how he knew what time Oswald would come through the basement or how he got into the basement. If you saw him shoot, therefore he did it alone. And if you see John Hinckley there, he did it alone. Mm-hmm. And you saw his hand, didn't you?
You saw his hand, didn't you?
Time Magazine and Newsweek, and they all have it. This is the end of the first half hour. We're going to take a 1-minute break. This goes too fast.
Already?
Isn't that terrible? We'll take a break. This is Mae Brussell and Ray Fabrizio and Carmel, and we'll be back with you in 1 minute.
World Watchers International with Mae Brussell. We will return with the second half after a brief pause.
Okay, this is Mae Brussell and Ray Fabrizio, and we'll go back with some more comparisons of the John Kennedy assassination and the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan because I think Ray and I both agree he probably won't outlive, for one reason or another, he's not going to go through these 4 years as president. He's been marked. So for all purposes, this is just the first gun, don't you think?
I'm afraid so.
I think so. There were other comparisons I just want to mention briefly, and I'll do more of this next week when I'm on the air. This January in 1981, in front of my house, January the 13th, there was a very suspicious car I could see from my window in the study, and I looked up, and this white car was sitting there with a male in there, and I asked them what they were doing. They were about 10 minutes, and they were looking for a room to rent in my house. The woman said she'd been there before, an older woman, about 5 or 6 years older than the man, and he was spaced out on, it looked like drugs, and she looked like a tired kind of a hippie. And I made a note that he was 24 years old and stocky and a wide face, and they said that somebody in the house spoke German, and if I didn't have a room for them, maybe he could do some electrical work for me. And I asked to see his driver's license. It was 517 TSF, and he said his name was John Randall, and that he lived in Santa Barbara. And I typed all this up because I was going to L.A. the next day and made note that he appeared to have this sort of Artie Bremer face, and he wouldn't answer questions, and she did the talking, and I asked him if he would talk. And I remembered just this week the John and the white automobile and Ronald Reagan's home base in Santa Barbara, and John Hinckley being in California very often and not accounted for from October the 9th of 1980 until January 21st, 1981, where he shows up in Colorado. And I called the FBI and the Secret Service. They said the name on the license does not match this John Randall, whoever he was. And I had told a member of my family, I think I've seen the stormtrooper in front of the house. For all the world, he looked like a Nazi stormtrooper. So when the story came out about John, this John Hinckley, was interesting to me. He was about the same age, 1 year difference, the same body description, the same appearance, the same spaced out description that the motel people gave in Colorado just before he came to California. And his interest in the Kennedy assassination is, I understand, in Colorado, there's locked up in his family's home all these articles about Kennedy and John Lennon, and I had been for years doing connections of the Nazi Party, the Kennedy assassination, and the conspiracy of John Lennon. And he had a lot of satisfaction in the Lennon murder and was consumed with the researchers, and even had a picture of Oswald with him when he was doing these shootings. So I'll follow more next week on this subject, but I was calling the Secret Service and the FBI. This was Thursday night, and Friday morning at 8:30 in the morning, I got a telephone call from Marina Oswald in Texas, and Ray and I were talking about that before we went on the air. And I'll share that with you later. I don't want to divert from what we're doing, but I just, the people that take the tapes every week and are interested in this as a running process of understanding what is going on, I thought it was interesting that Marina called me, and we talked for about a half hour, because I was looking into the possibility of the Hinckley family and the oil engineers in Texas working with Marina and the people that she knew in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So it was quite a shock to get a call from her and talk about these matters just at the time I was investigating them. Now let's get back to the other coincidences or similarities, whatever they are. I don't think they're coincidences.
No, I'm afraid not. Maybe one, you have so much interesting stuff to get into. I don't want to take too much time here,
No.
But I think another parallel that is obvious is the need to create a motive for these, quote, lone assassins. You know, I mean, they said that Lee Harvey Oswald killed, I mean, after all, you have to have a motive, right? Lee Harvey Oswald was dead, so they could create any motive they wanted. And the story, the official story, is that Oswald killed Kennedy in order to go down in history.
The history. Oh, that's...
And yet he denied, of course, the motive. This motive is so absurd because a man who wants to go down in history as a killer of a president would proudly proclaim it, yet Oswald denied it always. Now, they've come up with a motive for Hinckley.
Yes.
He's in love with... I guess you mentioned that in your last tape, though, didn't you?
Well, a little bit. I mean, he wanted to be known as a person, you know, historical in stature to prove his love for her.
Right.
A nobody who wanders. Well, you know, I've often said you take people that work in espionage like E. Howard Hunt. His children didn't even know he was a master spy for 20 years until Watergate. They don't go to known places. They don't have neon signs.
Of course not. They don't leave diaries. I think
they don't
it's
leave
peculiar. It's only, it seems to me, this, and I don't mean this in any unpatriotic sense, but it's only Americans who seem to believe these Disneyland stories. You know, can you imagine a European believing
that you leave notes around?
They know that. I mean, these stories, they can't even come up with really sophisticated stories. To me, they're patently suspicious.
Well, I think that in order to close the case within 24 hours, you have to have the motive right there. And the adjectives that they've used, which we compare, say, the Kennedy assassination tonight to John Hinckley, were used also with Sirhan, charged with killing Robert Kennedy, James Earl Ray, with Martin Luther King, with Artie Bremer, the Wallace shooting, the SLA with their writings on the wall of the Manson family, death to the pigs, and these notorious diaries are supposed to divert you from these lonely wanderers who go in and out of countries, who have passports, who, like John Hinckley, graduates from high school and travels for 7 years without only one arrest, and he's out in 34 minutes, staying Delta Airlines, American Airlines, the Sheraton hotels, motels with swimming pools. He has a car, he leaves at his parents' house. They tell you how he's going back and forth, the Dan White story, to McDonald's for hamburgers. Well, what about that white Valeri car he had, or whatever it was? You know, he has wheels, he has gas, it costs money as much as us. He's in college a few years, he's up in Illinois, he's in Washington, D.C., where he's pictured in front of the White House, Lee Harvey Oswald, you know, the route from the Marines to home base to New Orleans to Paris and Le Havre and Finland and Moscow and then back home, and the government pays his way. A loner rejected. Every time...
Yeah, the loner rejected.
James Earl Ray's in London, he's in Portugal, he's up in Montreal. They're all over the world.
I've often wondered what there is about these concocted, simplistic stories that Americans seem to eat up. I think it's that I think we desperately want to believe that that political assassination is simply a non-American phenomenon, and we'll go so far as to believe these cartoon fictions.
Yeah. Well, see, the problem is that we will accept that bullets fly. We will recognize the president of Jamaica when 27 people plus more were murdered for him to be elected. The president of Korea comes in at the dinner, he shoots his successor.
Right.
We get Pinochet, who actually guns down, literally, you know, Salvador Allende. Everyone we're recognizing came in through the absolute slaying of the people before them. And then we can't say that the vice president or the secretary of state wants the power now because their espionage system is getting unglued because of multinational banking scandals and the involvement of CIA with Nazis and narcotics. We can't say we've got to cover the gaps and Reagan's too new in Washington. We can't. I have the luxury of saying that thanks to my audience and friends, but the average person doesn't have the luxury of even saying it out loud. You know, even thinking the worst and proving it was wrong.
Yes.
Much less thinking the worst and proving it was true.
That's right.
So that everyone they entertain is a gangland banana republic crook. Mm-hmm. And we want to pretend that the succession is orderly and that this loner.
Yes. All we need is more psychiatrists to keep our kids from being, you know, toilet trained too early because they end up killing presidents. You know, I mean, that's the. Well,
you know, you go to the hotel room and there's a letter to Jodie Foster, and the headline says the motive is there, yes. The lonely wanderer, and that they were neglected by everybody. Society never recognized them. He wanted to be like his brother, and he wanted to be like his sister, the homecoming queen, and he just went to. There's a Yiddish word, Nebish College.
Right.
It's not the Harvard of the South. Well, Vanderbilt isn't Harvard either. They have to put that in, that it's the Harvard of the South. It's still just old Vanderbilt.
Yeah. You know, there's another parallel there to the cooperation of the press. Was so necessary in the Kennedy assassination, and it's so necessary now. The press answers the questions at the same time that they're asked, and they're neat little answers for people who don't want to delve into them.
I spent the whole week just taking the Washington Post, the 2 pages in that, last Sunday on the 5th of April, and the New York Times, the whole page on the Hinckley family. And I typed, like the headline of the Washington Post, "An aimless road to a place in history, Hinckley's Odyssey and Troubles." See, then I listed what they leave out, that it wasn't necessarily aimless. He was protected by the judge in Nashville, Tennessee. He's protected by the FBI who don't fingerprint him. He's protected by his travels. As soon as the guns go off, he's taken to a Marine base. He doesn't have to go to ordinary jail.
Protected by the FBI
He's
also,
protected by...
because they didn't furnish his name to the Secret Service.
Never fingerprinted him. And he's protected by the CIA. He gets the most expensive attorney in the United States. He's protected by the courts that locked up all of his belongings and writings that should be available for a case, because now if Reagan isn't dead, of course you're not going to expose that. But I spent the entire week just listing, like the Washington Post, this is their great article, Chip Brown and Neil Henry. Failure to graduate from college, failure to get a job, failure to measure to his brother and sister, failure to connect with his father, failure to distinguish life from art, failure to be recognized by Jodie Foster.
Oswald again, all this failure.
So what I said is success. He obtained 7 weapons and traveled all over the country with them. Success. He was caught with 3 guns and 50 rounds of ammunition and was never fingerprinted at the airport. Success. He took courses on Adolf Hitler and Mein Kampf and slave labor in Auschwitz, where no other colleges hardly teach German Nazi history in any places that I know of. Success in locating Jodie Foster and finding the door to put notes under her, which would be very difficult at college like Yale, with a guy who's freaked out, at least as spacey as the one I saw in front of my house. After 10 minutes, I said, "Go, you're danger to me." Success at having his own car and driving around without ever being seen and nobody knowing where he gets his gas. Success in getting 50 hollow bullets and inflicting almost mortal wounds and not being announced for days that they're in these people. Mm-hmm. Success to find out where the president would be at that moment, which is pretty hard to do. And success to get in and out of college, never having debts or any problems, paying your airline fees, living in California 2 or 3 years, no job in his life, traveling. They mentioned Delta Airlines, American Airlines, flying around, buying 1 gun for 100. All they did, they mentioned 3 little items he hawked, like they found a pawn shop, a $15 silver watch in Hollywood Boulevard 5 years ago. And they can't find where he bought gas or if he was in front of my house in January. Isn't that like Oswald, the most minute details of babysitters, success at traveling to Texas, Chicago, St. Louis, Dallas, Nashville, New York, New Haven, Washington, D.C., never saying who took his picture in front of the White House, who he saw in Washington, D.C., his links. Success when he was arrested, not taken to an ordinary jail with other homicide cases. As I said before, getting his top lawyer. Where did he fail? I asked the question to myself. Yeah. He almost got Haig and Fritz Kramer's protege into office, and Bush, director of the CIA. Maybe this is what he wanted to do. Maybe he is helping a group of people that have claimed since the Kennedy assassination, and in volume 17 and 18 verbatim, if we did 8 or 10 murders, we would control the United States. Maybe he's doing just what he likes to do. Why? I don't see any inkling that he suffered.
That's right, and he was successful in getting in with the TV crew there. So when you need a Secret Service press card. Not just an ordinary press card, but you have to have clearance with the Secret Service to get in there.
Of course. I mean, these wanderers, you just don't wander, and they take down the guardrail and so forth. You just
of course
everything that he wanted that would prove to a certain group of people, say that Reagan had to be done away with, every door was open for him. Mm-hmm. And people were predicting from the time Reagan won the election that he wouldn't live out his term, that it would be 3 or 4 months. And here's this guy at the right time, the right place, and Reagan still isn't out of the woods.
Yeah. And Time magazine is still at their old tricks. I mean, this article and the recent one showing this cartoon picture of Reagan and the trying to present, I think the word madness is in the title, and they're trying to suggest that the country is mad. That's why presidents get killed. In other words, it's kind of illness, and that we're all guilty somehow.
Yeah,
that propaganda campaign is very dangerous, because when if we're feeling guilt about firearms or something like that, then we tend not to be active in rectifying situations. Guilt is a very harmful emotion in that sense. You feel guilty, so you give up control.
Yes.
And they're trying to make Americans feel guilty for
this violence.
And
for all of these assassinations.
Right.
Is America violent? And yet, if they would write those editorials after they've accounted for who took his picture, such as when E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy broke into Dr. Fielding's office, they had their picture. It was very common for the Nazis to be photographed where they did things and how they did them. They kept a record of everything. And he's smiling in front of the White House. And until the FBI or the Justice Department says who took the picture and what date and where he stayed and what phone calls he received, how can they say within 2 days that he's the loner? The Secret Service was directly across the street from the hotel that he stayed in, the headquarters. Yes. And they make note that he's near the White House, but they don't say he's near the Secret Service office, or that the agents were always over at the hotel having drinks.
Does that remind you of Oswald passing out supposedly pro-Castro leaflets out of the same building that housed the CIA office in New Orleans?
In New Orleans. That was another parallel, is that by Lee Harvey Oswald being seen with an altercation there, they could say that he had confrontations with the law enforcement, that he was having pro-Castro pamphlets. And as soon as he was put in jail, he called the FBI and said, "Let me out." Well, I think a parallel here, and I think you'd agree, is that going through Nashville and apprehended with these weapons the day Carter was there made it look like he's stalking or assimilated to Carter, so that if he shoots Reagan, it's a senseless thing. The media twisted around that it was just senseless.
They keep using that word all the time.
Senseless and wandering. Surian, the wanderer. They wander, but what motels, they find the tackiest witnesses, like a maintenance man from a dormitory 5 years ago can have instant recall that all the shades were closed and he only had a TV. He may have had the shades closed, just like when Howard used room, all the shades were closed over the window so that nobody from an airplane could take a photograph of who was in the room. This is the truth. In the upper floors, they put boards over every window when they were wondering who was in those rooms, and black curtains. So for Howard Hughes, it's normal, but for Hinckley, it's a sign of a withdrawn inner person.
Right. Like if a guy's robbing a liquor store and he kills the clerk, they don't say senseless murder. I mean, that's not senseless. He's killing the clerk in order to rob the store. But when somebody kills a president, it's a senseless killing.
Sherman Scully believes that Hinckley can be attached to a man in Chicago, and possibly he was involved in a murder in a Jew in Chicago in 1977. He's putting this together, that Hinckley was working with the Nazi Party and an agent from the CIA who traveled all around the world. But the adjectives that we get with John Kennedy and all the others that we don't have time to go into with Hinckley, the wanderer, the loner, the senseless, the searching for history.
And of course, they try to say that about Oswald, but we know too much about the real Oswald now. We know about the intelligence man at Atsugi Naval Base, the man who we had him on tape speaking excellent English, speaking beautifully. And I have no doubt that we'll find out that Hinckley may have some of the same background that Oswald had. His connections with intelligence. Well, you've already established some.
Well, I was wondering about a group that went to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and the oil people, all of the people left. There are two areas that I've always pursued with the Kennedy assassination that I believe separated me from the intelligence agents that pretended to be doing the work. And one was the Torbett document with the missionary in the church front particularly Albert Osborne from Nashville, Tennessee, who ran a Nazi camp of Boy Scouts funded through Permindex with his headquarters in Jamaica at Tyrol Bay, who was on the bus with Lee Harvey Oswald into Mexico. And the missionary that he had were not religious scout people, but assassins working with Division 5 of the FBI. Now, that was an area that very few people would use, and when I called Robert Blakey of the House Select Committee and said, do you have the Torbett document, he said, I won't answer you. I said, I'll send it to you. He said, I won't answer you, and he hung up. And it's interesting because this family, the Hinckley family, were devoutly Christian and working with the World Vision Group, which is a missionary group around the world in 85 countries that could possibly be an umbrella cloak for the intelligence operation. A religious, they call it third world, but they mentioned Nigeria and Brazil and other non-third world countries. And is this the kind of missionary Christian group that funded Albert Osborne? Christian church groups from California, the Southwest, Oregon, all listed in the Warren Commission hearings, sending money to a man in Tennessee that they thought was a religious person, and he in turn gave it to assassins. And at the time that Hinckley went through Tennessee, when he was apprehended at the airport with handcuffs and 50 rounds of hollow ammunition and 3 guns, they let him off in 34 minutes, and his brother went to Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee, and then to Singapore for an oil company, so that there's a ball of wax here. And the other area of the Kennedy assassination that people, Lane and Sylvia Marr and the other researchers, wouldn't touch was all that information in the volumes, volume 18, page 700 and 800, of the links of men brought from Germany, military intelligence, into the Dallas area meeting with the CIA. There's a whole can of worms of people that had youth groups that would be very useful for future murders, and I wonder if in the 10 years after John Kennedy was killed, they picked up these young people, like these Hinckleys, John Hinckley, who came from arch-conservative, redneck, really Nazi mentality, the G. Gordon Liddy mentality, and that this son was not a bad branch off of their tree, but a part of the family tree, working more actively for getting the show on the road of getting a real fascist coup in this country, moving Reagan out. So this neo-Nazi group in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I'll do more of it on other tapes, was the Hinckley family part of that milieu? What is the unfinished business of Dallas, like the missionaries, the church fronts, the assassination teams, which overlaps with the Hinckley family now with the missionaries and the untold money. In 1973-74, when Hinckley moved to Denver, Colorado, according to the Wall Street Journal, he was bankrupt. He had no money. And then Vanderbilt Energy all of a sudden came into a lot of money. And those were the same years where the Australian CIA money with narcotics and the Phoenix program and the assassination teams was dispersing money. And is the unfinished business of the Mo Dallas, Castle Bank, Giancana, Rosselli, even though they're dead, are those people still working for that one world fascism, as against what they call the one world Rockefeller communism? The far right considers David Rockefeller a one world giveaway, and anything that touches him as a communist one world, whereas they have said we will assassinate or kill to make sure we're not in the clutches of, say, Chase Manhattan. So is the Hinckley group out of that fabric that began when Kennedy was killed? They lived right in the neighborhood. They were there till 74.
If that connection exists, how arrogant, how audacious these people are. I mean, the connection between the Hinckley and the vice president is so close. I mean, they must have a lot of they must have a lot of confidence to
Well, it'd be as audacious as on November 23rd if Lee Harvey Oswald's daughter is having dinner with Lyndon Johnson's daughter at the ranch. if she were old enough. If Rachel was 20 and is having lunch with Lyndon's daughter on the 23rd. If Oswald, yes, I think to have this person arrested and airlifted to a military base and then hire the law office of Williams and Connolly, when Connolly was so much a part of the cover-up of the Kennedy assassination. And Williams, their attorney, was covering up the Bobby Baker, the Lyndon Johnson connections, the Connolly, the Watergate. He's been the attorney for this whole ball of wax. So that beyond the ballistics, you get into the oil energy, connecting links of the family, the neighborhood they lived in, H.L. Hunt's, the extreme right wing, and the media tries to present Hinckley as being a kid that somehow went sour. And we were talking about this before. The Texas rule of thumb was kill. Why, even Lyndon Johnson, our own president, was suspected of murdering the man whose seat he took. It plays on Broadway like McBird. Why do we talk about South Korea? The literature that came out naming Lyndon Johnson as taking over because of the murder. There's some people that dare say it here. So I think the comparisons to Dallas, they exist because they haven't been cleaned up. Don't you think so?
That's right. And I think if Dallas had been studied at the time, these shots would never have been fired at Reagan.
That's right. And if it were studied today, it would stop more shots.
That's right.
It would get us back away from the bullets or blackmail and into the election box again and having a free choice. The people innocently, I said this to the Republicans when they would put me down for doing research on the Kennedy assassination. I said, just wait till you get the man in that you want and see how long he lives. See if you really have a choice in this country. And a lot of Republicans began to see a little better, I think, in the last week and a half.
That's very interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's going to throw a lot of light on the kind of hidden government that's speaking right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, our hour is over. I think we could do about 10 or 20 hours on the similarities. They never end. But it begins with the ballistics and then gets deeper into specific people and places and time. Thank you very much, Ray, for being here.
It's my
really
pleasure,
great.
Mae. It's always fun to talk to you.
Okay. This is Mae Brussell and Carmel. You take care, and I'll be back with you next week.
This has been World Watchers International with noted conspiracy investigator Mae Brussell. This program originates from Carmel, California.
Expect the unexpected. From KLRB, Carmel.